Robert Jordan created a massive world with many different cultures and many different peoples, and we've got tons of maps to tell us where all those people live. But have you ever wondered how many people actually live there? In today's video, we'll be figuring out just that. Now, we'll be pulling from clues in the books, interviews from Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, and we're going to figure out just how many people live in the Westlands and in the world of the Wheel of Time. This video will carry a spoiler rating of red. There will be major plot spoilers through a memory of light. I will not be talking about specific plot points, but I will be addressing things that happen in the last battle. So if you don't want to be spoiled, watch this video at your own risk. You have been warned. So some quick business before hopping into the meat of the video. First of all, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow. I appreciate it. Thank you to all of you that are already subscribed. The other thing I want to mention is that I have a new channel that I've started, but we'll talk more about that at the end of the video. So let's jump in and answer the question, how many people live in the Westlands and further, the world of the Wheel of Time? Before we answer that question though, let's first list out some things that we know to be true, as well as some assumptions that we'll be making before we dive into the topic. Now, it's worth noting that the exact populations of the nations of the world, as well as the cities, aren't really given in the story. So we'll have to piece together what we can from interviews, context in the story, and then the companions. I think the first thing worth noting here is that this world is the same world that we live in. This is Earth. So right now, our population is around 8 billion on the planet. And one could assume that during the Age of Legends, when some of the population lived to be hundreds and hundreds of years old, sickness and illness were basically eradicated, and food and poverty were gone, that the population would be at least that, or maybe higher. There is an argument to be made about as societies grow and progress, that birth rates drop. But again, the other factors here about how long people live and how people aren't dying at the same rates, I'd say it's safe to say that the population in the Age of Legends was around what it is now, or let's say within 2 billion of it. So maybe on the low end, 6 billion people, but possibly a great deal more on the other end of it. But why does that matter? Well, it's important to understand how much population could be supported, as well as knowing that the Age of Legends occurred around 3,000 years before the start of the story. But the breaking of the world was a calamity on a scale that we have never seen. The world was literally totally changed, and the population was almost destroyed. There were no remaining cities, no remaining centers of power. Entire mountain ranges were destroyed and then created. Robert Jordan was quoted as saying that something along the lines of, "Have you noticed that there are not many easy passes through the mountains in the world of the Wheel of Time? That's because they are all new mountain ranges." All of the mountains are new. That's crazy. When the breaking of the world ended, the population of the planet had to be a mere fraction of what it was just a few hundred years before. Now, the population must have recovered though, as the world was finally able to support 10 large nations in the time after the breaking, and this is the time of the 10 nations, and it seemed as society was rebuilding itself. But then the Trolloc Wars came, and that ended and decimated the population again. Then you have the Kingdoms of the Free Years, which covered the continent of the Westlands. That ended with the conquests of Gwera-Malasan, and then followed by Arthur Cockwing uniting the continent. The time after his reign saw kingdoms shrinking, and areas that were previously inhabited became uninhabited. It seems the population was shrinking and civilization was disappearing. And that's the context that gets us to the time of the story. So let's estimate some population sizes. Now, we do have a few things taken from Robert Jordan's interviews that we can use in our estimates. We have the population of one of the largest nations in the world, as well as some rough populations of some of the major cities. So let's talk about those. First, we have one population for a nation that Robert Jordan gave us, and that was for Andor. Robert Jordan said in an interview that the population of the nation of Andor was around 10 million people. We also have some major cities that he gave us ranges for. He said that Tar-Valon had a population of around 700,000, and that the other major cities of the Westlands had populations between 300,000 and 600,000. There are a few major cities that seem to all be comparable in size to one another, and I guess they're considered pretty large. Caemlyn, Tyr, Ilion, Cairhien, Tanchico, Ebudar, they all seem to be on the higher end of that range, likely between 500,000 and 600,000 people in population. There are other cities in the world of the Wheel of Time that are likely near that population, or at least in the hundreds of thousands. All right, so one of the strategies that we can use to project a population amount is using the population density of Andor and extrapolating that out across the other nations of the world. Andor has a population of 10 million people, and it covers roughly 500,000 square miles of land within its borders. So that would give Andor a population density of 20 people per square mile. The Westlands, which is the subcontinent where most of the story takes place, is around 7.3 million square miles. So if we use that same population density, that would give us a population of the continent of 146 million people. But there's a major problem with this argument. There are major swaths of land within the Westlands that are almost completely uninhabited. The Caroline Grass, Haddon Merk, the Shadow Coast, Eastern Kyrian. All of those areas have very, very sparse populations. So using those measurements would make this a little problematic. And to put things in perspective, the United States has a population density of 94 people per square mile. But let's try this. What if we used just the 16 nations of the Westlands? Well, if you total up the land of just the 16 nations of the Westlands at the time, that gives you a total of 3,482,000 square miles. Now, if we use the population density of Andor as a base again, that would give the Westlands a population of roughly 69 million people. Now, what's odd about that is Andor would have 1/7 of the entire population of the entire Westlands, and Andor has huge parts of it that are uninhabited. So it's possible, and even probable, that the population densities of some of the other nations are higher than that of Andor, simply due to Andor's large size. So we might need another way to figure out accurate population numbers. Another method that we could use is to use army sizes from the last battle and extrapolate how large of populations they could support based on those army sizes. So we can make a few assumptions about the last battle. First, that almost every able-bodied individual that could fight was going to fight, because they're literally fighting for the survival of the world, not a meaningless war. There would not have been massive amounts of potential soldiers or able-bodied fighters that just didn't come. During World War II, it's estimated that Germany mobilized up to 42% of its male population to fight. 25% of the male population of the UK was mobilized. This obviously doesn't include women in the totals, but we do know that many women did fight in the last battle, although not as many as the men. So let's use Germany's figures, because one would assume the armies of the Wheel of Time, again, were fighting for their survival, and they would have sent anyone. Let's also estimate, rather than 42% of the male population, that it's 33% of the total population. I feel like that's probably more accurate. So we'll use that as our baseline. So what do we know about army sizes? Well, we know Andor raised an army of roughly 200,000, including Perrin's army and Kyrian. The Borderlanders put together an army of roughly 200,000 people. The armies of the White Tower, which included the Saladar army and the Tower Guard, were about 100,000 strong. Tyr sent an army of 80,000 and Ilion the same. And at one point, Rodel Ituralde raised an army of 300,000, including Dragonsworn, to fight against the Shanshan. The Band of the Red Hand had roughly 30,000 members. The Legion of the Dragon, an army that Rand raised, had 70,000 members. Lord Bashir had a cavalry of 8,000 men. Lan was leading an army of about 12,000 into Tarwin's Gap, and although we aren't counting the Shanshan just yet, we'll get to them later, they did have a large number of Terreboners and Amadisians fighting in their armies, as well as Altaran soldiers. So let's estimate 250,000 from those nations. That gives us a total of 1,330,000 fighters, apart from the Aiel and Shanshan, which we will cover later. So using the 33% figure, that would imply that those nations only had a population of roughly 4 million, which is a great deal smaller than our previous figures, and honestly, smaller than the population of Andor. You would actually have thought Andor could raise an army of that size based on its population. So that would lead us to believe that these nations could have raised much larger armies. I can actually believe that. There are many smaller towns, and most of the population of the Westlands is rural. Even when traveling, it would be difficult to find all of the towns and raise armies from nothing. There were not large standing armies prior to the last battle, so they would have had to raise and train the armies from scratch. I'd say that this strategy really is not going to help us find an estimation for the population of the Westlands. Another thing that we can do is project a population size based on rural population figures versus urban populations. We know that this is essentially a Renaissance era society, although the population is shrinking and there are not many large urban centers. For example, in 1500, the population of London was around 50,000 people compared to a population in the UK of 2,750,000. The average figures at the time of the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance era was about 75% rural and 25% urban as a population mix. Well, we don't have exact population numbers for the cities, but we do know how many major cities there are, and I think we can at least throw some guesses out there based on these ranges. There are roughly 25 or so city-sized places that we know about. There are many other small towns and smaller cities around as well, but let's assume those 25 cities have an average population of 250,000. As we know, some of them go much higher and some of them will be much lower. That would give us a population of 6,250,000 in those cities. But let's assume that there are many more larger towns that we don't know about and population centers that we aren't considering. So let's go ahead and throw another 1.75 million people onto that total. That gives us a total urban population of 8 million people. That would mean our total population is just 32 million for the Westlands, which is really low. We know Andor doesn't have 1/3 of the population of the continent. If we double the estimate of people living in cities, let's say that takes us up to 16 million, which that's accounting for a lot of people that we don't know about. Even using that number, we'd still only have a population of 64 million, which also seems low. So I think that the best solution is to use a combination of all of these and meet in the middle for our estimates. I think that the population density is the safest bet, but also thinking about rural population and urban population as well. My guess is that the population of the Westlands sits somewhere around 100 million people. That gives us a population density of around 14 per square mile, which is still extremely sparse, but it feels more accurate. It would mean that Andor has about 1/10 of the population of the Westlands, but that feels somewhat accurate knowing that it's the largest and most powerful nation. But what about the Seanchan and the Aiel? What about Shara? What about the land of the madmen? We don't have much to go here on other than the Aiel. We know that there were roughly 800,000 Aiel that crossed the Threefold Land to follow Rand or oppose him, talking about the Shido. And while it's not likely that all of the Aiel came, we know that that's not true. That was probably a large amount of their population. I think it's safe to estimate the Aiel population as no higher than 1.5 to 2 million people. I think when it comes to the Seanchan, we can assume a few things. They have a far more organized system of government and they are unified. We don't know that there are any areas that are uninhabited in Seanchan, and there appear to be cities everywhere from the maps we've seen. So I think given the higher level of order and the seeming peace that they have there, from the brutal strength of the armies, I say that the population could be near 1 billion people in Seanchan. Seanchan is gigantic. So with Shara and the land of the madmen, it's almost impossible to say. They would be total guesses on my part, but for the entire world, I'm going to guess a population a little south of about 1.3 billion people. What do you guys think though? Is there something that I'm not thinking of? Let me know in the comments of the video what you think the population of the Westlands would be. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to be updated when I release more Wheel of Time content. That's all I do on this channel. But if you want some non-Wheel of Time related content, please check out my new channel called Know, Lead, Grow. For my real job, I'm a personal and professional coach. And while I've wanted to bring a lot of the things I get to work with people every day on to YouTube, I haven't been able to do it up until this point. Now I've done it. So if you're somebody that wants to grow personally and professionally, that's what the channel is all about. I'll be releasing at least one video each week right now. Please go subscribe and check it out. Again, it is Know, Lead, Grow. I'll have a link in the description of the video and at the end where you can check that out. Special thank you to all of my patrons for supporting the channel and all I do here. Please check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel and the type of content I make. It seriously helps so much. Lastly, check out one of these videos here that you also might like. Thanks for watching, and until next time, peace out.